Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's session of the Avid Live Online Learning Series. We're so happy to have with us again Marianne Post, and we're doing Let's Do the Timewarp Effect, which is a great title. So we're happy to have everybody with us today. We will be following on the social feeds as well, but those of you that are watching us in the webinar, we are recording this so we can post it back to avid.com at a later time. Also, your microphones are muted, as you know, and we will be taking questions at the end. So feel free to enter those at any time, as well as raising your hand, and I can get to you if you're having an issue. Most of you know Marianne Post. She is one of our Avid Master Instructors and has done so many of these sessions. So thank you, Marianne, for that. And as always, I know we are going to run up on time, so I will pass it off to you.
All right. Thanks, Dawn. Hey, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well. Today we're going to talk about Timewarp, but 2 weeks ago we talked about optimizing our systems, and I just want to circle back to that real fast because of what happened right after our session where I didn't listen to my own tips. One of my big tips during that session was closing out things you're not using, don't have too many things going on, and to monitor your activity using something like Apple's Activity Monitor, which is just in the utilities of your applications folder, or use the Task Manager on Windows. So right now, I have a few things going. I've got Zoom going, I've got Media Composer going, and Safari going, but the bottom option here, swap used, has 0 bytes, which is your goal. That Friday, my system started slowing down considerably, and I took a snapshot. I actually went to activity instead of just starting to close things out, and notice my amounts. I was trying to get an example together for that session and didn't even get close to this. So just a reminder, if things start slowing down, check that activity monitor, check that task manager, and close things out. So I'm gonna take my advice today and close out of these utilities and pop over to Media Composer. Hold on a second. I'm really sorry, I forgot to share my screen. Sorry about that, guys. And I can't hear either. So, okay. So, sorry, apologies for that. I got excited. And let me get back into Zoom and get audio back, just in case Dawn needs to yell at me and tell me I'm muted. Okay, cool. All right, so what I was saying and not showing was that my activity monitor was incredibly high. So just go ahead and make sure that you monitor that if things seems to be slowing down instead of blaming whichever software you're working in, which is what I tend to do. All right, and you can find your activity in like your utilities folder or your task manager on Windows. Okay, so on to today's topic, which is we're going to talk about the time warp. And this is actually a session I've covered before in a different way. In fact, I think it might have been my first session, which started out better than this one, beginner's luck. And we covered the straight up time warp effect. And this time we're gonna cover some of the presets, which came out of a question you guys asked a couple of sessions ago, asking about the presets. So we made a session out of it. So yeah, definitely ask questions, definitely suggest sessions, and we will try to get those together for you. So time warp is speed effects within the timeline. And I have a sequence pulled together here that I'm gonna play back. Hopefully you guys will be able to hear the audio, but if you can see the video, it'll be all good. And so I'm gonna go to full screen mode, which is Shift Command F on the Mac, Shift Control F on Windows. And let's just see what this Tennessee parkour footage is that we use in class and I've used in previous session is all about. All right, so there we go. So these guys do some amazing street tricks and that kind of thing. It's excellent action footage, which is ideal for time warp, especially if you're just getting into it. The more motion there is, the easier it is to kind of see what's happening with the various effects. So that's what we're going to use. So the first clip I'm going to work with is this fountain shot, and I'm just going to pop back into full screen mode a second. And I just marked the clip with the T key on my keyboard, and I'm going to hit option 6 just to kind of play this a second. Okay. The 6 key plays into out. Adding the option or alt on Windows allows you to loop it. And I am going to mute, otherwise that's going to get annoying for all of us. But yeah, so there's this lovely trick going on, but maybe we want to have it start at a freeze frame and then ramp up. You could absolutely create that with this time warp effect, but we have these presets that can help us. Now, presets can serve 2 purposes. One, it's a great way to get to know what time warp does and how it works if you're new to it. Second, it can do some of the work for you because it's got some presets set up. So if I'm like thinking, oh, we're going to start on a freeze frame and then speed up, I can start with this effect because some of the keyframing is done for us. And so you just drag and drop the effect onto your segment in the timeline. Everything's timeline based. And then you go into the motion effect editor. So I'm going to click the motion effect editor in my timeline palette. And here's the time warp. And then to see what's going on, I'm going to use the speed graph, and you'll see if I just adjust the scale bar a little bit, that there's a keyframe at the beginning and the end of this. So the vertical values are your speed. So 0% means freeze frame. And then it goes up to 100, just as the effect says. All right. So now if I play this results, and I'm just going to go back into full screen mode here and play loop, it starts on a freeze frame and then speeds up. Okay. So when I do that though, notice I don't get like the total end of everything. Okay. So you can adjust this. I can do things like, oh, maybe we want it to start frozen for a little bit longer. And maybe there's a voiceover or something that's going to cue the motion. So you can move your keyframes. And if I hold down my option, alt on Windows, I can drag this forwards. So I'm going to kind of exaggerate this a bit. And when I drag forwards, now it's going to be frozen a little bit longer. And then if I want to get more of the action, because what's happening when you slow down is you're seeing less frames in the shot because you maintain your duration. Now I had durations called up earlier, but then I crashed because I was doing too many things. So I'm going to go to my clip text here. Oh, here's durations. It's fine. I just probably need to enlarge my track. I'm just holding down my option key, alt on Windows, and making this taller. So you can see this is 2 seconds and 2 frames. No matter what I do with my time warp effects, all of them but one, your duration in your timeline is not going to stay, is not going to change. So that means when I'm speeding up or slowing, when I slow down, I'm going to see less content. All right. So I can compensate for that, maybe especially in action, by just raising the speed of this. So I can start with a template and then it just becomes a situation where I tweak it to get it the way I want without having to add the keyframe, set up the effect, and then adjust. It's set for the adjustment. So this one goes from a freeze frame to whatever speed. And then I'm just gonna play loop here again. So now we're seeing more of the end of that trick where he leaps to the next ledge. Okay. So 0 to 100, and as you might expect, 100 to 0 does the opposite. So it's going to start at full frame and then go to freeze. Okay, so I'll just pop into full screen here and we'll play this back and see what the difference is. Okay. Now that may not be what you would expect. Okay, notice we're not seeing the beginning of the trick where he's jumping off the fountain. And then we're seeing the end of the shots, actually. Okay, And that's because of this feature right here, which is the anchor frame. When I did 0 to 100, there's an anchor by default at the very first frame of the shot. And that has it, whatever your first frame is, no matter what you do, it starts from there. Now I'm going to do a few undos because it's building on itself as I'm replacing it. So let me just go undo sequence effect here. And now we're back to the original shot where he's jumping off the fountain, does a couple leaps, okay? When we do the 0 to 100 effects, the anchor is at the first frame. So no matter what I do, this frame's gonna play first, okay? So if I decide, okay, let's speed this up. Okay, now I'm seeing more of the action at the end, okay? Whereas no matter what I'm doing, this is the first frame. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this effect to get it back to the original, which again, we see all the action. With the 100 to 0, Media Composer says, okay, this frame, the last frame, after he's done the second leap, is going to be the last thing we see, okay, no matter what. So it moves this blue anchor to the last frame. And then that's why when we cut to this, it's mid effect, mid trick. He's already past this fountain. Now, so it's kind of the opposite. I changed the last keyframe on the first option, 0 to 100. On this one, I'm going to change, if I need to speed it up, get more action, I'm going to change this one. And now at the beginning, let me just play loop here. I'm still not quite fast enough where you see him actually on his feet on the fountain, but we are seeing that earlier action. It's not starting with just the runs up that ledge, okay? So this automatically changed the anchor to the last frame. And no matter what I do in other points, this frame's still gonna be the very last frame you see. Okay, so 0 to 100, 100 to 0, you can use them as jumping off points, and then you can either move your keyframes. I'm doing option, which is just moving it left and right, but if you're finding that you're holding option or alt and it's moving up and down and left and right, which sometimes I actually want, but you just want to move it left and right, just add your shift key. So when I hold down shift and option or shift and alt on Windows, now I can't move up and down. I'm trying, but that shift key constrains it. So you can only move it in time and not change its value, okay? So using those presets. Another example is the freeze frames. I'm just kind of going down the line here. And with freeze frame, it's gonna freeze a frame. Now, you may be using the traditional freeze frame where you load a shot from your source bin into your source monitor on the left, and then go to composer menu and freeze frame and create it here. This creates a clip. So if you change your mind as to which frame you want frozen, you have to go back to the original clip, recreate it, re-edit, and just saying that's a mouthful, which means it's a number of steps. So whenever I can, if I know I'm gonna end up using a freeze frame of some video, like, let me just mark this clip and go into full screen mode here and play it back. So if we've decided, let's just make this a still instead, I can really easily with Timewarp, okay? You can't apply freeze frame from here, the composer menu, those are only for source clips. So I'm just gonna pop a freeze frame on here, and there we go, just like that. When I go into full screen mode, so you guys can see and play it back, nothing's happening because it's a freeze frame, okay? So it is playing back. I have option 6 going, it's looping my freeze frame now, okay? So as you can see, as I scrub, nothing's happening. Now here's the beauty of using this, and this is why I love using Timewarp for freeze frame. So this is definitely one of the presets I use quite often. What if you change your mind? What if this is not the freeze frame? So maybe the client's comment is, oh, let's go closer to this building or something. Or maybe there's something in the screen that you want to get out. We could use maybe this as a reference that I'm pointing to here on the right. all I have to do is pop into the motion effect editor in the timeline palette. It takes me back here. And then you can see it automatically set the speed to 0 on the speed graph. And there's my anchor at the beginning. So a default would be this. So this is basically what we had. All right. So what I can do is if I'm like, if there's something in the screen you like as a freeze frame, you notice that's distracting, kind of making it up here. But if this is distracting, I can just go to a spot where that's no longer there. And then I'm going to freeze this frame. Well, you freeze at the anchor. Okay. And the anchor is the first frame. So I just have to move that anchor. And the way I do that is by adding a keyframe. So I can click the add keyframe button. You can also use your quotes key on your keyboards. And I can see I have a keyframe up here. And when I'm calling out these hotkeys like quotes, that's the default keyboard. If you remap your keyboard, you'll want to use that hotkey, of course. So there it is, because the anchor has to be at a keyframe. And then over on the left, there's this anchor that I can click the button and it moves it over. And then I'll just delete this original keyframe, okay? And drag this down. Now that might feel like a few steps, but compared, I promise you, compared to having to go find the original source clip, go to the composer menu, create a new freeze frame, overwrite that into my timeline, this takes longer to explain than do. So now I have a different frame for freeze frame. Okay. And the nice thing too with this, I'm just grabbing this zoom slider, is if it's a frame that wasn't in the sequence, I just bump up the speed pretty heavily. And now I have access to lots of frames, because when you speed up above 100%, it's content that's not in the timeline. Okay. And then once again, I can say, oh, let's use this frame instead. Add keyframe, anchor it, delete, drag down to 0. Or you can even plug it in numerically here. So now I've changed the freeze frame again. That wall is pretty much gone. Okay. And this lamp gets to be the star of the freeze frame. Okay, next, let's go down the list. Reverse motion, I do use this, especially if you have like some shot like this, where instead of zooming into the buildings, I want to zoom out. Or instead of pushing into the opposite, pushing in to the buildings, I want to push out. You can just reverse motion, or you can help up the skill, the difficulty level of shots like this. So here's the situation. These guys are, because it's not challenging enough, doing a backflip off this wall. All right. Well, what if we want them to do a forward flip, which is more difficult instead? Well, if we reverse the footage, we can get that to happen. All right. So that's the one thing. If there's people in the shot, like they're walking, they will walk backwards. Okay. But in this case, when I apply a reverse, you can see in the speed graph, like the default for time warp, the standard time warp is 100%. This is just set to -100. It's just faster than just going to time warp and then taking it down. And then of course, now these guys are absolutely amazing because they are flipping forwards. Okay. There you go. All right, so that one's kind of self-explanatory. Speed boost and speed bump are the two that may not be obvious. And again, from experimentation, I would say, hey, just try it. You can't break it. I can, but you guys are probably a little bit more coordinated than me. But speed boost is basically going to take us from a slow rate, boost the speed, and then slow it down. Again, speed bump does the opposite. So it's kind of like 0 to 100. But rather than just kind of describing it, let's take a look at it. So I've got this shot here. And I'm going to go back into full screen here and play loop. So yeah, he jumps off the wall, does a lovely flip, and then almost lands. All right, so maybe we want to play around with a little bit of speeding it up at some point so we could see more content of this. But for now, we're going to do a speed boost. That might do it for us. Okay. And when I apply that effect with Time Warp open, notice I don't see speeds over here on the left. I see time codes. That's because Timewarp has two graphs. There's a speed graph and a position graph. And I just hit the speed graph. The keyframes are on the position graph. And in fact, it says edit graph is position. If you apply a speed boost and you decide, hey, you know what, I don't really understand yet how to work with position, I want to work with speed. Unfortunately, you can't do that. One of the decisions when you're using any time warp with keyframing is that once you pick a graph, you're using that graph, because if I go to speed, notice it reset everything. This is actually just defaults as if I applied straight up time warp. Okay. The good news is I can go back, so it does not forget what was done. But essentially, we can monitor the speed graph to see what's going on if it's not quite making sense over here. And as I said, it starts off a little slower, speeds up. So you can see it's going from like just below 50% to 200 something, and then back down. And the result, if I play this back, is this. So you start slow, speeds up through the trick, and then it slows down. Okay. And I can play around with frames and timing and that kind of thing. To read the position graph, these are actually source time codes. Okay. So whatever clip, speed never changes. Of course, those percentages are constant, but the time code you use for your source shots are going to change, obviously, because they're recorded at different times. So this slower hill here, the shallow hill, is just fewer frames. And then the steeper hill is actually more frames, which makes sense because it's sped up. So the faster you go, the more frames you need to play back. Your frame rate's higher. And then it slows down at the end. So the good news is that I can play around with the when of this by holding down like shift and option and just moving this over, which is going to impact the speed as well. But maybe I'll be able to see more of the trick. And then maybe I go on this side. Oops, I just selected two keyframes. Let's undo that and just select this one. There we go. So if I raise this, now I'm adding on content. By just raising that, I'm now actually seeing his landing, and I can still maintain that speed boost that goes from 50%, basically speed up, and then he's slowing down in for the landing. So it's more like what I think of time remapping, an effect that I have used quite a bit in Adobe After Effects. So if you use time remapping in Adobe After Effects, position graph is how it works. It's the same. And then the default for time warp tends to be speed. So what's nice about playing around speed boost and speed bump is it can get you acquainted with using the position graph, which there isn't as much information out there because speed tends to be a little bit easier to learn. Okay, so I am going to once again go through my undo redo list here. And I'm just going to go back to right before I added this effect, or that effect actually. I went back too far, but that's okay. I'm not handing this in to a client. Speed bump does the opposite, starts fast and then slows down. So let's mark this and go into full screen, option 6. So it started out a little faster and then it slows down in the trick. So that's common in sports, okay? And then same kind of idea. You'll see that this hill is taller this time because there's more frames source frames being played back, okay? This is shorter. And then again, at the end, if I want to see more of the end of the trick, I can just bump up, so I'm using more source frames, which is gonna speed it up. And then you can tweak those keyframes further. Let's see. There we go. Make sure we can play something back. And we got that nice slow trick in the air. And then the speed up. Because I get a lot of questions of, well, I want it to kind of start at this point, speed up until this frame, and then slow back down or something like that. The position graph is going to get you there because you can actually pick out which frames action's going to happen. Where speed starts just adding and removing frames. So this is a great way to get acquainted with that. The last one I'm going to show, because I'm running out of time, of course, is trim to fill. I use this a lot too. Usually my scenario for this is I want to like do a dual roller trim or something. Let me get this out of the way. I want to do a dual roller trim, and I might have used the very last frame of the shot, say here on the left. You can't, like if I was going to move this forward, you'll hit the end of the shot and you can't move it forwards anymore. This is not that example. There's so much footage for this that I would have to specifically edit that. But the scenario also is, what if your content's locked in? So like the last frame of this clip is after these guys just exit the shot. If I do a dual roller trim, I might be okay. Just showing more lag time of just the scenery without any people in it. So I might say, hey, I need this content locked in. This is exactly the content we need to use. So, but I need to do my dual roller trim. Trim to fill will allow me to do that. So I'm just adding it to the clip that I want to lock the content in for. And it could be both sides. And then I'm going to go into trim mode. I'm just lassoing my edit because I like to do that, because then it automatically selects my tracks for me super fast, takes me where I want to go. I'm not going to see the image because there's an effect on it. So I'm just going to go forwards a bit. And then when I play loop, I'm just going to hit my space bar this time. Notice that it cuts, even though this shot's now longer by 8 frames, it still cuts right after they exit the shot. So why is that? Because if we go into the motion effect editor, and if we look at the speed graph, we could see the speed of this shot has been slowed down to about 82%. Okay, so trim to fill. If your content's locked in, or maybe you're trying to trim and you use the very last frame or first frame of the shot you're trying to trim and it won't let you because you don't have any more handle, this can help you. I've used it where, you know, it's just a couple frames, of course, that's usually when it happens, and it'll slow it down to like 98% and nobody knows, the story gets told. All right, so you get trade-offs. Okay, so that's all the examples I have for right now. I will take questions, but I want to pop back over to Zoom and just make sure I can hear. So do we have any questions?
We did have a question from a new Media Composer user. He's asking, should he really get a, let me rephrase this. Should he really learn that speed burst file before he kind of dives into the other parts of the application?
Like, so other editing functions, start with Timewarp, or well, you have to get your clips into the timeline, so it's definitely good to know how to do your splices and your overwrites first, build your sequence out. As far as getting familiar with Timewarp, I would, you can even just start with the Timewarp Effects. It helps to understand a little bit of keyframing. So when we covered in class, by the time we get here, we know how to get our footage in, we know how to edit it together, get it into the timeline. And then we also know how to add keyframes, because when you go into the generic Timewarp, by default, about all you can do is grab the pink keyframe and speed this up or slow it down or freeze it. You have to kind of understand a little bit about how keyframing is working. But if you're familiar with all of that, but you haven't used Timewarp before, I think it's great to dive into like the 0 to 100, or like the end 100 to 0, or these two effects as well. And the speed boost and speed bump are great to work with if you've never really worked with a position graph. It'll give you a better feel for how that works. Hopefully that answers that.
Yes, it did. You got 2 thumbs up, so awesome. Thank you for answering that.
Good.
And welcome to Use a Media Composer. So
yeah,
glad to have you on the discussion.
Yeah,
all
we
right,
love the users.
Yes, we do. And our seasoned users, because they always figure out some really creative.
Yeah,
let me just scan around here really quick to see if we have any other questions coming in. I'm not seeing any at this time, so we'll give everybody just another moment. And while we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can see Marianne's next sessions coming up. Whoops, so I don't want to share that one. I want to share this one. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. So hopefully you guys can see the calendar. Is next week we have relinking low res to high res. And then we're going to be coming back on August 19th with Audio Efficiency Tips Volume 1. So we're excited for that. Also, as Marianne mentioned, if you have ideas and you would like to see her talk about something in the sessions, please drop us an email. We look forward to that. We love to build these sessions based on what you guys need or would like to see. Also, if you're a Pro Tool user and you happen to be on, we do have Andy Hagerman, and he's also always looking for new topics to add to his sessions as well. Let me see. I did get a question come in here. So let's see. Oh, yes, the recording will be available on the website, and it is still currently on YouTube as well. So you can go back and look at the sessions there. And with that, I'm not seeing any other questions, Marianne. So I think we're good for today, and we're going to look forward to next week with relinking.
All right. All right, great. Hey, guys, take care, and I'll see you next time.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks, everyone, for joining.